Hi, this is Brandy Shantz, and you're listening to Living Chronic. Today, I'm speaking with Fred Diamond, author of the book Love, Hope, Lyme, and also podcast host of the same name, Love, Hope, and Lyme. Thank you for being with me, Fred.
Brandy, it's great to see you again. Thank you for the invitation.
So I'm really excited that you're here because you are a caregiver, a family member, if you will. And I just think it's so important to bring the caregivers, bring the family members, bring the loved ones in, because you're just a part of our support group. You're our rock. You're our teammate through all of this, whatever that may look like at that point in time. And of course, it looks different at different points in time. So, how about you tell me a little bit about your story as being a caregiver, a family member, a Lyme supporter, disease supporter?
Yeah, so my book, Love, Hope, Lyme, What Family Members, Partners, and Friends Who Love a Chronic Lyme Survivor, came out in August of 2022. And my story is slightly different. I had a person in my life who I knew had Lyme disease, and I paid attention to what this person was going through, and I was very supportive and aware. About 19 months ago, again, we're doing today's interview in March of 2023, but in the spring of 2021, this person who was very close to me decided it was time for her to pursue her healing independently, and had chosen to move into a different situation to really focus on 100% taking care of her Lyme situation. At that point, I said, I need to know more about this. So I read every book that I could find on Amazon, joined Facebook groups, Googled Lyme, Lyme warrior, Lyme survivor, talked to anybody I knew who ever uttered the word Lyme. And Brandy, the thing that I realized was I only knew 10% of what I know now. And trust me, I was a very devoted participant in this person's life to ensure that, not just the Lyme, but, that we had fun, that we did things and, really optimize what life was making available to us. But then when I started doing the research and I understood what Lyme survivors go through, specifically chronic Lyme survivors, like I said, I realized I had no idea. So I wrote an article for LymeDisease.org, which prior to this research, I didn't even know existed. The article was something like how to be supportive when your partner has chronic Lyme. Next thing I knew, I got 500 people reaching out to me. The article got like 1,000 downloads. LymeDisease.org reran the article, I think 4 times in total, got something like 5,000 downloads. People reached out and said, you need to write more. You should expand this into a book. So I did. I wrote the book, Love, Hope, Lyme, like I mentioned, and I now have like 2,000 new Facebook friends. I have people all over the world, Brandy, who reach out to me asking for advice. And I like to tell them I'm a history major with an MBA. Go find a Lyme literate medical doctor. Here's my general recommendations for someone who doesn't have the disease.
Mm-hmm. I think that's great. There's so much that, heck, we don't know when we become ill. So to have a supporter who spends so much time learning about what you're going through, I think is just amazing, because it's so hard to even just vocalize and put into words what we feel sometimes. And, your experience is not, I don't think, unusual. I hear it from a lot of people. I've felt it myself. There's a bit of disease guilt, if you will. When I married my husband, I did not have Crohn's disease. I was a very healthy and vibrant young woman who was very independent and could do anything and everything on earth. And then suddenly I was a woman who needed his help getting to the hospital quickly, or cleaning up, or, just doing basic things. So I think you've heard the same thing from many people, where there is a bit of guilt that people feel that you're taking away from someone else. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So what happened was when this particular person in my life said that she needed to pursue her healing independently on her own, I then Googled Lyme disease spouse.
Mm-hmm.
And you know how like when you Google something, there's like a million pages, you know, you Google the weather this weekend, there's like 10 million pages. I Googled Lyme disease in spouse, 2 pages came up. And it was the same article from 2014. And it was written by a Lyme disease survivor talking about her guilt. I'm guilty that I'm not a better spouse. I'm guilty I'm not a better parent, a better friend, a better employee, a better daughter. And I was like, what is going on here? Mm-hmm. The other thing I began to notice as well is when I jumped up on all these Facebook groups, and I was an active Facebook group user because of, you know, my business, and I have a lot of friends. And I Googled, I typed in Lyme into Facebook, and there's like 1,000 Facebook groups devoted to Lyme. And some of them have 20, 30,000 participants. You know, some have like 500, 1,000. And I started like logging into these groups, joining these groups. And the reason that I really pursued writing the book, and now, of course, the podcast, Love, Hope, Lyme, was every day I would see 2 posts. My spouse left me, or my family doesn't care, or my parents don't believe me, or my friends have, left me. And I would see this 2-3 times a day. And I would then put the post to the link to the article I had written for LymeDisease.org, how to be a supportive. I said, I didn't realize this was a problem. I wrote this article to help people understand how their loved ones needed to be supported. And all of a sudden, people were reaching out to me. Oh, my God, thank you for writing this article. No one believes us. Nobody cares. Lyme is an invisible disease. A lot of the chronic illnesses are. So it's not like, you see someone walking around with crutches or anything. So, people say they don't believe us. People say, why aren't you able to work? And then people would say on these posts, my spouse left because he would say, or she would say, I need you to work, or why are you always in bed? Or you're not the person who I met, 5-10 years ago. Yeah. I miss when we would go out and all those types of things. And what I had found is that, people weren't saying I'm making this conscious decision. It was the overwhelming fatigue, the stress, the pain that in my particular case, chronic Lyme was doing. So I said, this ain't right. Someone told me as I was writing the book that 75% of relationships had ended because of with chronic Lyme survivors. And someone also said 95% of those, the ending was caused by the spouse who said, this ain't for me. I didn't buy into this, nice to know you type of a thing. And, I wrote the book to bring people together, to bring some peace, to share some insights that I had learned in all the research I had done.
And I'm glad you did that because, and the statistics are a little bit different for each chronic illness, but I've noticed they're very similar. Crohn's disease, colitis, there's just so much that interrupts a life, and there's nothing to prepare your spouse or loved one for what's about to come and change. I'm about to reveal a little dirty secret of mine. I like the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. But you know what? There's some good stuff that comes out of there. When Yolanda Hadid was on that show, she has chronic Lyme. Yeah. And it was the best representation of what a real Lyme disease sufferer goes through I think I've ever seen. Her friends questioned whether it was real. Lisa Rinna tried to accuse her of having Munchausen syndrome. Her husband did end up leaving. She, tried to understand, hey, I'm not the woman that I used to be. But it was just the best representation of Lyme and of many diseases I felt. And I wish that even if you don't necessarily like the Real Housewives, I wish everybody could watch that, or at the very least read your book, because it's so true. This is exactly what we go through.
Well, the summer of 2021, I read 40 books, including her book. And I was a fan of the TV show, but it really didn't matter. She went through, it's funny, when I decided to write my book, there were 3 types of books, Brandy, that I was able to read. The first were books that were about, like an inch and a half thick, written by doctors. Richard Horowitz wrote How Can I Get Better? Daniel Kindlera wrote a great book, but they went through almost like the entire history of Lyme, every possible thing that could happen to you, all the co-infections, which I didn't even know existed. The average tick, Lyme is a tick-borne illness. The average tick can transmit as many as 3 dozen diseases. Lyme is the most popular, but then there's like Bartonella, Babesia. They all have different functions and different ways of interacting. then I saw the books like Yolanda Hadid's book, and Tommy Hilfiger's daughter, Allie Hilfiger, wrote a book. And I call those books my battle with the tick books.
Mm-hmm.
Here's when I found I had these problems. Took me 10 years to get diagnosed with Lyme. I finally was diagnosed. Then here's all the treatment. Here's how people interacted with me. And then the third category of books were mindfulness in Lyme, keto in Lyme, meditation in Lyme, herbs in Lyme. And my book, Love Hope Lyme, fell into that category. I wrote it. It's about 150 pages. I wrote it to be read in an hour and a half.
And you can. I did it.
Thank you. And the reasoning was, I was with someone with Lyme for 12 years and I thought I knew everything. And
Mm-hmm.
the way I summarize it, Brandy, and you and I've talked about this, is that my job was to keep this particular person out of stress
Mm-hmm.
and know where the best gluten-free pizza was. Because
Sandy.
gluten-free. But then when I started doing the research and I realized there were so many more things to it, I said, people got to know this. And here's the thing too. A lot of back to the guilt word,
Mm-hmm.
what I noticed was a lot of the people participating in the various Facebook groups. And then of course I moved on to Instagram and other places. Reddit actually has 11,000 people.
Reddit is a treasure trove of information.
Yeah. Someone said you should do some posting at 11,000 people in the Lyme group. The thing that I wanted to tell these people was you might be feeling guilty, but not everybody who loves you is seeing you the way that you're seeing yourself.
Mm-hmm.
There's the expression, when you have your health, you could do a million things. And
Yes.
when you don't have your health, you can only think of one thing. I never thought of this particular person as being sick. I just thought, okay, well, she has Lyme. And if there were moments when she needed to be left alone or to rest, okay, go rest.
Mm-hmm.
Not everyone's thinking, I'm out of here. You're not the woman or man who you were. This isn't what I want. A lot of the people that you're in love with and you're in relationship with, they want to care, but they don't know.
Right.
Originally I wrote the book for the caregivers, and that's a word, by the way, that I never even knew existed prior to writing this book. But I wrote the book for the spouses, the partners, the boyfriends, the girlfriends, the children, parents, to help them understand. And I didn't expect too many people with Lyme to want to read the book, but a lot of them have read it and said to me, you helped me understand how I need to communicate how I want to be supported.
Yes.
So that I now know I can ask for this type of support and not depend on my loved ones to know how they should be supporting me. That was an eye opener for me.
At the end of every podcast or somewhere in what, each episode, I ask, what do you wish you knew when you were first diagnosed, when you first started this job, whatever it may be. And, there's just so many good ones. I hope I can continue this podcast for years and put this in a book because it's so good. But one of the many, many is I wish I had known that this is a forever disease. This will affect my life. And I need to communicate to my husband and bring him in and say, we've got to be a team. Things are going to change. They're not all going to be bad, but we need to be a team. And I think that would have just done wonders because, of course, I went through it like, well, I'll be fine. I'll just figure everything out on my own, trudge forward, power through. No need to worry about me, Steve. I've got it. And that was just the wrong answer. So, thank you for, really putting that out there because I think it's just probably one of the best lessons to learn. Your spouse is your teammate, your family's your teammates.
Well, it's you raise a really good point. And I own a business. It's called the Institute for Excellence in Sales, and large companies with sales organizations are my customers, and we do programs for them. Mm-hmm. So in business, if there's any problem, you get the team together, you're in the military, you had to figure this out. It's like, okay, what is the problem? Well, we need to get 10 more clients. Okay, Bill, what do you think we should do in customer service? Sue, in marketing, what are some things we should do? Let's get into a conference room. Let's build a plan. Here's our plan to get to 10 more customers. And let's get this plan implemented every Tuesday morning at 9. We're going to check it out. And we're going to see where we are. And sure enough, we're going to get to 10 more customers. Well, putting together a similar plan for treating a disease like Lyme disease or many other chronic illnesses it ain't work that way, right? You can but here's the thing though, you could break an ankle. Every orthopedic surgeon on the planet is going to get you some x-rays. They're going to probably put you in a cast. They're going to say, sit on your butt for 6 weeks and go binge, Breaking Bad or whatever. We're then going to take the cast off or remove the boot. You're going to go through rehab for 2 weeks. Then you're going to be fine. Every orthopedic surgeon on the planet, doesn't matter if they're in New Jersey or Hawaii or wherever they may be, Sydney, Australia, with Lyme and other chronic illnesses, everybody's history is different. Everybody's the way that their life has brought them to that moment, the way they've treated themselves. There's no pill for Lyme. I viewed this before I understood what was going on, that, okay, we're going to put a similar plan in place. Here's the plan. We're going to follow it. 3 weeks later, you're going to be recovered from Lyme. What do you want for dinner?
Yep.
Well, it ain't worked that way. And I didn't know that. And one of the messages I get in the book is that, we want to show the person in our life that we love them. Mm-hmm. And that means curing them or helping them get past this. In some cases, it means, I don't want to be limited by saying just being there, but understanding what they're going through. Read my book. It was written to be read, in a short amount of time, to at least understand that there are co-infections and that there's a healing process. One of my chapters in my book is the 6-step healing process. And it's not prescriptive, like it's different for everybody, but almost like it was based on Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 6 stages of death and dying, or 5 stages. And there's a process that you need to get through. And there's a lot of people who have gone through that process and are living full and beautiful lives, not based on the disease.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And those are the things that, I want to remind myself, and I want to remind my listeners. There's hope. It's going to be okay. I'm hoping to get one of my neighbors on. She has UC, and she's a very successful executive. Gets out every morning, does a big job, doing great. I think the thing that we forget is, I think most of us think like you. I thought the same thing. So did my husband when I was diagnosed. I'll get to a treatment plan and we're just going to move on. When there was no set schedule and treatment plan, well, what do you mean you don't know if this is going to work? What do you mean it may stop working if it does? And I've told this story a few times, but it's something I'll never forget. During a really, really bad Crohn's flare for me, when I was in and out of the hospital a lot, I had lost a lot about my life. I was, buddy, right? Going to Walter Reed Hospital with a friend of mine because she had, trying to remember, I think it was cervical cancer. But I remember her saying to me one day as we were driving to Walter Reed, she said, Brandy, I'm sorry to say this, but I'm so thankful I have cancer instead of what you have. Mine's going to be gone in 6 months and it's done. I ring the bell and move on. You're never going to leave this for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And I thought, you're right. But it's one of those ugly truths you need to face first so that you can move on and do things, like talk to your spouse about, well, maybe I'm feeling well enough we can go on vacation, but if we have to cancel the outing to, go hiking, maybe, you can be okay with that. Or maybe we can have a plan B where you go with a group and let me just sit back and do my thing. You just have to accommodate your viewpoint on life. You're just never going to get that 6-month treatment plan.
I want to mention a couple other things that triggers, and thank you for that great story. The people in your life, and this is a message specifically for those with chronic illness, Lyme, whatever it might be, people who are listening to the show who have gone through what you're going through and will continue. We don't resent you. Your spouses, family members. I talked to a bunch of Lyme survivors, and I've spoken to 2,000 people over the last 2 years as I've been thinking about this and discovering this and writing this book. Most of the conversations, of course, were via text message or Facebook Messenger or something. Even on LinkedIn, I met a whole bunch of people. And they would say, my spouse resents me for having this disease because we can't go dancing every Saturday like we did when we were in our 20s. We don't resent you. We don't maybe understand everything that you're going through. We don't truly, it's like people say you don't get Lyme until you get Lyme. Probably the same thing with chronic illnesses. And you don't want to get it, but you're not really going to understand it until you truly have it. You could feel the pain. I mean, people have said to me, you can't imagine the fatigue. It's not just like, gee, I had a tough day, I'm going to pop in front of the couch and watch the Kardashians or whatever. It's like an excruciable pain. But here's another little thing too. You mentioned the woman who you were going to Walter Reed with. I do a podcast as well. It's on sales performance. It's called the Sales Game Changers. When I discovered this and I became familiar with what was going on with chronic Lyme, et cetera, every 10th show or so, I would have somebody like your friend who was a VP of sales who also had chronic Lyme disease. And I would talk about how they succeeded even with chronic Lyme disease, because a lot of people just can't get out of bed. A lot of people can't work. Yep. A lot of people have horrible anxiety, which causes them to shelter at home, if you will, not just because of the last 3 years, but just because they just don't have the energy or whatever to get out. But I've interviewed these people and they've had to truly manage their actions. So, for example, I interviewed this one woman who's a VP of sales, and she said, 5 o'clock every day, I'm done. Not doing emails, not doing work. I'm done. And on weekends, I'm not doing work. I might lay in bed and read, but I ain't going to the office. I ain't traveling, and I'm still a high performer.
Yes.
But because I'm living within the realm of what I can and can't do, and it's not easy. You have to figure out what that point is, but the message here is you can still live a very fruitful life. I'm not going to say everybody can. What's wrong with you for saying you can't work? I'm not going there at all. Right. But I am saying that there are people who have been able to live fruitful, amazing lives, and they have some kind of chronic illness.
You're right. And sometimes that changes from time to time. When I was first diagnosed, I had to make a career switch because I couldn't do what I was doing and accommodate my illness. But I made that career switch and I did great. And then I came to a point where things were so bad I couldn't work at all. And I used to joke when people would ask me, what do you mean you're fatigued? And I said, well, honestly, I thought I was narcoleptic. And then the doctor explained to me, no, you do not have narcolepsy. You have fatigue. You're sick. I thought, oh, okay. Because, I just fall asleep wherever I was.
Right.
But then again, I jump back up and I'm right back into the game. And, I talked about this a lot with Heather Bowie, somebody who did a friend of mine. She did my podcast probably 4 or 5 weeks ago. And she talked about how when she was down, she'd still get some work done, but she was very clear with her boss, hey, I'm a salaried employee. I'm not required to give you X number of hours per week. I'm required to give you an output. And I did my work.
Yeah.
And those are the things I think it's important to remember. You can still work. If you can't, you can always come back. And I wish, I hope there's some employers out there listening to my podcast as well, because I think so often employers see somebody who had to leave work for a medical condition for a period of time and they think, well, hands off that one.
Yeah.
And no, hire the disabled person who needed some time off. It might be your best employee. I mean, my goodness, everybody I know who suffers from a chronic illness is the toughest bird you'd ever want to know.
Yeah. I have a question for you. What do you believe about things like mindset or mind over matter? I've had varying degrees, and many people I've spoken to, some people say my mindset got me through. I shifted from being sick or always being ill to being whatever it might be. And then there's other people who have said, it's not about mindset. The disease, a chronic illness can be so overwhelming that you could be meditating, mantraizing all day long, and it's not going to make a difference.
I think both are true. I've gotten through, and I'm one of those people that likes to journal. And when I wake up in the morning, I want to write down, my aspirations for the day. I will, have a good attitude. I will do everything I can, beyond, within reason, do my best to do this. I'm going to feel great about this. I like positive affirmations. That being said, when I'm really sick, I can mindset all day long and I'm just, my body's only going to let it do what it's going to do. So I try to remember that it's not always my fault. And, my husband tells me the same thing. I'm ridiculously resilient, and I think most of us are. It's amazing how I bounce back from pretty much everything. I'll get in the worst funk and be so depressed, and then 2 hours later, I'm like, okay, I'll try that again. I'll be fine.
Mm.
I'll get up. Don't worry about me. It's amazing what you can bounce back with. But I think it takes both. I mean,
Yeah.
If you're sick, you're sick.
I've heard that too. It's like, yeah, I mean, in the sales world where my profession is, we talk about mindset a lot. And it's like, I used the example before, okay, we need 10 more clients. Well, we got to think as if we deserve those 10 clients. And every morning we have to get up thinking, what do we need to do? And it's 5 o'clock. It's like, should we retire, go home? No, let's work another hour. Let's put our mindset into we're providing so much value, et cetera. And I believe in that, obviously, but I have heard from a lot of people with chronic illness since the book has come out before, and I was doing the research, where they said sometimes, a lot of times, the illness is just so overwhelming that you try, but then the next thing you know, you're in bed for 3 days. And yeah, so it was also a message I communicated in the book too, was that a lot of people said, it's like all the support, you can do it, you can get past this, you're bigger than the disease. Some cases they didn't want to hear that because, the reality is I'm not bigger than the disease, especially when it's flaring and especially when it's, there's stressful moments or whatever, and the pain becomes beyond what we talked about before. So, it's a delicate balance. I'm hoping again that the book is going to bring some peace to a troubled community. If anything, I've had so many people who reached out and said, I'm going to be sending this to or ordering copies for my nephew and for my sister who I haven't spoken to in 5 years, who doesn't believe me, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, hopefully we're providing some degree of difference.
I think it's great. And I think it applies to other diseases as well. When you're a caregiver, you're a caregiver. And especially when it comes to autoimmune diseases, chronic illnesses people don't know much about. I don't know if I told you, but pretty recently I was diagnosed with long COVID. The universe decided I had not had enough. But there's a lot they don't know about it. They're experimenting with drugs for it, but they don't know if they really work. And I'm not even a candidate because of how badly I reacted to my Humira. So, there's all of these diseases out there that there's not much known about, that you can't cure, that are chronic. And I think that, your book is just really amazing for anybody who knows someone who's going through this, so that you can better support them and understand. I think so often people think they're helping when they're not, or they just kind of shut down because they don't know what to say.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. And when I like to say, 2 years ago, I knew one person with chronic Lyme disease, and now I know thousands. And I've had people who've reached out to me. I'll share one interesting example. There was and people want to talk about this. People who do love somebody, they're afraid because not everyone is familiar with this, and they don't want to do the wrong thing for the person that they love because they've tried to do things and they were shunted because that's not what the person needed at that moment, type of a thing. Like I mentioned, I run a company. It's called the Institute for Excellence in Sales. My customers are VPs of sales of companies. And there was one guy that I've been trying to get to for 10 years. And we know each other, but I've never been able to get him to become a customer. I've been posting, Brandy, all the time about my book. Every day on Facebook, I do two types of posts. I go to someone's house who I'm friends with, or to their office or wherever. I give them a copy of my book and I say, let me take a picture of you reading the book. And I do that all the time. I have two copies. I also read a sales book. I have my sales book and the Lyme book always in my car. I'm not going to hand it to a guy at Wegmans to take a picture, but I thought about it. But basically, this guy said to me, he said, I noticed that you've been posting a lot about Lyme disease. What is the story? And then we talked it like this for about 50 minutes about my example. And he said to me, my son's 32. He has chronic Lyme. He hasn't left his room in 3 years. He can't work. He's not who he was. I really appreciate that you being public with this, because nobody is. It's kind of unbelievable to me, Brandy, that I'm the first person to write a book from this angle. Like I mentioned, there's a bunch of doctors' books and first-person books that no one had thought of writing a book from the partner, caregiver, spouse angle. But he said to me, he told me his story, and he said, I really appreciate that you're doing this. And then he said, tell me more about what's going on with the Institute for Excellence in Sales. And we started talking about the business, but that's not why I wrote the book. But I've heard from so many people who have said, my wife's sister-in-law has Lyme disease. And someone said to me today, we're doing this interview in early March. Someone said to me, it wasn't until I read your book that I understood all the implications of Lyme and so many ways it impacts people. He said, I just thought it just went after your joints. And a lot of people think it looks like arthritis. And, just one other quick thing for the people listening out there, there's two parts that I've discovered of this journey. There's what's wrong with me journey. Mm-hmm. It's like I have all these problems. Nobody understands what it is. I'm being misdiagnosed time and time again. And I heard from so many people who said, and this is important for the caregivers, so many people who said to me, they went to 10 doctors, 20 doctors. The last one that they went to said, we can't find anything wrong with you. You may want to see a psychiatrist. There's something wrong. And I'm sure you can relate to that. Mm-hmm. But then there's someone who said, have you heard of Lyme disease? Because everything you're telling me, and this just might be a nurse, might be a physician assistant, maybe it was a doctor who said, I think you might have this thing called Lyme disease. And then the problem is it's very hard to test. Yes. Let's say they make the determination. And then I met so many people who were like, thank God it's Lyme disease. And then the problem happens because there's the second half of your journey, which is there ain't no easy way to cure Lyme disease. Like we talked before, it's not a 2-week take a process, especially when it gets to that point. I mean, you could take if you discover it pretty quickly, like maybe the day after you went on a hike and you have some pain and your joints are bothering you and you see a rash, then you do some antibiotics, you probably should be okay. We estimated, or I read a stat where there's like 5 million people on the planet who are at the chronic stage where it's control. It's try to get into remission. There's no cure per se. Right. So it's a conundrum. It's a challenging disease. And I applaud you for, having a platform to talk about your journey, which is quite remarkable, and to bring on other people who can give some insights, because everybody's looking for answers. Yeah. And I'm still amazed. I jump up on Facebook and track some of the groups. People are asking questions that I've seen asked 100 times. And people are saying, hey, I heard about this particular treatment. What is your experience? Mm-hmm. And then somebody will say, it saved my life. Then the next person says, it didn't work. Right. Then the next person says, I just started, but I'm feeling better. Then the next person says, I did it for a month. It made me worse. It's such a horrible, horrible situation to be in.
It really is. And it's difficult. Even last week, my podcast was with Dr. Bruce Kerr, Potomac Psychiatry. You know him just as well as I do, brilliant man. And he said something that really stuck with me, because as we're doing more research on things like my disease, Lyme disease, others, it's this meeting of your own DNA, your own genetics, your own experiences in life that meet environments you've been in. And then, of course, how you treat your body, how you feed your body. And he said, just say to people, it's not me, it's my DNA. And I love that, because it does affect each one of us differently. There's a theory we have. It looks pretty strong, if you ask me, when you have tens of thousands of veterans coming home after serving next to burn pits, suddenly having IBD, eureka, it was probably the burn pits. But they're doing more research that shows that, it was the burn pits. Yeah. And not everybody got it because it depended upon your genetics, your DNA, and then being next to the burn pits. So somebody else who didn't have the same DNA or genetics came out not necessarily fine, but maybe they didn't get IBD. So I think that's important that we do share and talk about it, because most people don't talk about it and they don't know. The doctor might, diagnose you, and we all know how it can take years to get there. And sometimes I fear seeing certain doctors I've seen before, because I know I've walked out of an office in a tiff, but it's difficult, and we just want answers. And meeting each other, getting together and talking about these things, it's helpful. it's educational, and frankly, it's like a big warm hug.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, my people.
No, that's great. I mean, yes, and I observed a lot of these Facebook groups, and I kind of keep my arm's distance because I don't have Lyme, and I don't want to chime in based on something I've heard without having experience. But yeah, so many people have. I see the embrace with each other, like you said, the warm hugs. And the other thing too, I'll share. I think when I started seeing, there was two types of posts I would see, which led me to really want to do the book. I thought it was needed. There was the ones I told you where people said, nobody cares. My family, I haven't seen them in years. I'm going to spend Thanksgiving alone. My spouse left me, blah, blah, blah. And you know what the other ones I saw, Brandy, that really kept me going? I saw a post, and I hate saying this, but it was June of 2022. It was right before my book came out. I saw someone post on one of the Facebook groups, somebody please PM me the easiest way to take my life because I can't take this anymore. And the outpouring, to post that on Facebook,
Yes.
That you and, people have said the number one cause of death with some of these illnesses, specifically Lyme, is taking your own life because there's no easy way out. And you deal with that, I'm sure. And it's heartbreaking, but that's part of the reason why I wrote the book. It amazes me that I wrote a book with the word love in the title, and the response that people have shown me, people that are so kind all around the world. My book was reviewed by the Lyme Disease Association of Australia.
That's great.
And I have all these people reaching out, but I'm not saying that to boast. I'm just saying that it made me aware that there's so many people who are struggling with so many things. And the message to the people reading my book is this person is like this because they were bit by a tick.
Yep.
The person you love, your spouse, the mother of your children, she didn't wake up one day and say, I'm going to be a difficult woman because I want to be a difficult woman, or I want to go through this struggle with my health. She was bitten by a tick on a hike in Colorado or New Jersey or Martha's Vineyard. A tick. The Dalai Lama said, and I have this quote in my book, I love everything in this world except for ticks. So
yes,
it's just show the love and understand how you could be of better support to someone you love.
Yes.
To someone you love. And there's a lot of great people like your husband who support people. And I've met so many people who have said, I don't need to read your book because my husband's there for me and my parents love me. Good. Great.
I think there's so many people. Honestly, I think it's a great book for everybody to read. Not because, my husband's always loved me, but because it's a traumatic event. Yeah. And I think that's something that took me some years myself to understand. Yes. This is traumatic.
Yes.
This is a change in your entire life. You have lost your entire life as you once knew it, whether you know it or not.
Yes.
Maybe you're in remission today. Maybe you won't be later. Maybe you feel good right now. Maybe not later. And to deal with a trauma like that, it does take learning. It takes growth. It takes, understanding what you're about to go through. And it takes so much communication. My husband and I have had a lot of ups and downs over the past 10 years. And a lot of it comes from we need to communicate. How do you care for me? How do I care for you? Yeah. How do I let go of my guilt? How do you understand how to best support me? And that constant communication is just so important for that relationship between patient and caregiver. It really is.
You just raised a great point. It's, we talk a lot about communication, and in the business world, of course, you with your background, communication is critically important or else people are going to die. In the business world, if you don't communicate, and there's so many, I do a LinkedIn post every day related to sales. Once a week, I do one as it relates to Lyme disease to spread the word. But we talk about asking questions, simple forms of communication, and like 100 people comment, oh my God, I need to ask better questions. And you would think by now in 2023 that we would have figured all this stuff out, but we haven't. And, most people, I found they want to support the person that they love, but there's so much ignorance. It's so challenging. The person, like you just said, you went through a hugely traumatic event that you didn't plan. You didn't say, when you became 21 years old, I'm going to have Crohn's disease and I'm going to be in the military and I'm going to create a podcast. All of a sudden, for whatever God-given reason, the people who are listening to the show and you and the thousands of people I've met, something unplanned happened.
Mm-hmm.
I've met a lot of people who once they've gotten to the place of acceptance, they'll say they're grateful for their chronic illness because it helped them become a better communicator, helped them better appreciate the good things in life. But there's nobody I've met who said, I want to get a chronic illness so that I can appreciate more things in life. 0.0 people.
I would give this up to just take a class any day. Let me take.
Yes.
I'll get a whole degree in it. Just don't make me have the Crohn's disease again.
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously you've learned a lot. You wrote a great book. What would be the number one piece of advice you would give a caregiver? What's the one thing you really wish you knew when you first became a caregiver?
Yeah, I'll answer that in two different ways. One is I really didn't understand the breadth of this particular disease, chronic Lyme disease. And trust me, I was very committed to a particular person. And I thought I knew.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I knew. I thought it was about stress and keep this person out of stress. I didn't know. And this relates to like Crohn's and other chronic illnesses. There's so much more to it than what you see. And I'm not going to recommend, I read 40 books in the summer of 2021. I literally, when I was done reading the books, I went to the Facebook groups and I would say, does anybody want my copy of Richard Horowitz's How Can I Get Better? I read it. I didn't need to have a bookshelf of all these books because I was never going to read them again.
Right.
I wanted them to get into the hands of people, and people would, say I would love it. And if 10 people said they would love it, I would go to Amazon, send a copy, to them, if you will. So you don't need to do what I do. You don't need to read 40 books to understand what your loved one is going through. But I would say, take your knowledge up a couple notches.
Mm-hmm.
Give an example. I thought that the only disease, I knew Lyme was a tick-borne illness. I thought that was it. Now I know there's close to 36 other tick-borne illnesses, some which are quite horrific, Bartonella, Babesia. They all have their own treatment plan. They all have their own symptoms. So I would say take it up a notch. All you need to do is read one book, maybe join the Facebook group and just pay attention to what people are saying and give your loved one the opportunity to tell you how they need to be supported.
Mm-hmm.
You can't dictate, sweetheart, this is what we're going to do to cure you because it ain't going to happen. You don't know his or her body. So you need to let them tell you. And the last bit of advice, I was very fortunate to have Dr. Richard Horowitz, who's probably the foremost Lyme doctor on the planet. His team heard I was doing the book. Mother's Day of 2022 on my computer, and there's an email from Dr. Richard Horowitz, and he wrote the foreword to my book. I asked for a quote. He wrote this unbelievable foreword, and he said, the whole concept of love and how important it is. And he said at the very end, he said, have hope, be loved with proper medical treatment. Mm-hmm. You can't just have hope. You can't just be loved. You got to treat it.
Yep.
It is a disease.
Mm-hmm.
There's the perplexity is how do you do the treatment? But like you talked before, everybody is different. Every history is different. Mm-hmm. What you've gone through in your life. One other thing I just want to throw out there, I actually listened to a webinar that Dr. Horowitz did in summer of 2021. I was amazed at how much I knew about what he was talking about because I had just read his book and 40 other books. But as a throwaway line, Brandy, at the very end, like at the 59th minute of a 60-minute webinar, he said, oh, and by the way, you need to treat your childhood trauma or else you're never going to heal. Okay, thank you so much. And we could, I interviewed him for the Love, Hope, Lyme podcast. And I said, you mentioned that. You threw it. It was a throwaway line. Could you please explain that more? And you and I could probably talk for another hour about that. But
we could have a whole podcast because I recently had a doctor tell me that I needed to, because I have PTSD from my time in the Army, and it's making my fibromyalgia worse. It's making my Crohn's worse. Everything's a mess. And he said, you got to fix it.
I mean, what God love the people in our military and what they've been through. And thank you again for your service, which I've told you before, but yeah. And then you also had a childhood and then you've been in these traumatic situations. And a lot of the people that I've met, they said, they've had to be honest about acknowledging trauma. And like you mentioned before, about, the burn sites, et cetera. There's people who might have been bitten by Lyme, had an abusive father,
Mm-hmm.
and didn't matter. They're doing fine. They're snapping away. And your reaction to whatever trauma you've gone through may be slightly different. But again, I remember in this throwaway line, and you got to deal with your childhood trauma or else you're never going to heal. Okay, thank you so much. Goodbye. And that's something, again, that it's the psychological side, the psychiatric side, in some cases, maybe just as much, if not bigger. I'm not just telling people love somebody who you love, have hope. You got to be treated.
Yep.
We are talking about diseases that are impacting your body, and you got to figure out what is the best treatment for you. What are you willing to do? These are expensive. It's unbelievable. Yes. So those are some of the key messages.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. Fred Diamond, author of Love, Hope, Lyme, also the podcast host for the same name. That's a lot of H's. Love, Hope, Lyme. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you, Brandy.